Hey, what's up, guys? Back for another video. Today, we're going to be talking about what I saw Nostalgianomics post earlier today, and he was mentioning GameStop and how they're moving towards a more collectible company versus just games. And I wanted to dive in on a few points that I think that I can expand on. So we're just gonna hop right into it. I made up a PowerPoint for you guys, but GameStop reminds me a lot of Blockbuster in a lot of ways. With the nostalgia factor, we saw Blockbuster kind of get overtaken, with Redbox and Netflix and the ball that they dropped. GameStop was in a similar situation where it was getting outperformed by digital downloads and they needed to make a move. So they went from a company that people were betting to fail to what it is today, and it's a powerhouse. So how is it becoming heavily investable in collectibles? It is switched over the years of 2021 to start focusing more on collectibles. They're not selling just games anymore. They're hoping to find the future of investable collectibles. So they've picked up more like items. Obviously, cards is the big one. But yeah. So Blockbuster peaked in the early 2000s and filed for bankruptcy in 2010. As I mentioned, it was more so along the lines of Redbox coming out, being on every corner. You go to Walgreens or CVS, you'd find it there. And you could just go home from there. And then also with Netflix. Netflix became super popular around that time as well. Everybody downloaded Netflix and we're watching that. And it had, for the most part, everything you needed. Blockbuster failed to adapt and honestly buy out Netflix, but that's a whole other thing. So GameStop was in a similar spot. They had an opportunity, but they totally reinvented themselves. And we'll get into that. But for the most part, GameStop invested in themselves. So they bought out a lot of the Blockbuster stores. So what was GameStop's main problem? We'll get into that. But something that they had a differential that kept them alive longer was that they had trade-ins. So when you'd buy a movie at Blockbuster, well, you couldn't buy, but you'd rent. For those who don't know, you'd go in every Friday and you'd sit down with your family and watch movies that you picked up. And if you're a kid that gamed, you would buy video games or rent video games. The thing that GameStop had going for it is you would buy a digital copy and then you'd go in and trade it in. Now, you wouldn't get great trade-in value, but that's where they made their money, right? So you go in and you trade in a $50 game and they'd offer you $15 for a perfectly working game, and they would turn and flip that game for $42. And that's where they make their money. Obviously selling new releases as well, but digital games made it very difficult because you could download those games and you never had to step foot in a GameStop again. And especially when those big releases happened, right? Like, let's say Halo, Call of Duty, games like that. It was important to have it downloaded and ready to go that night. So, people would just stay home instead of going out and doing the overnight, stay where you could get the video games at midnight. So what happened in 2021? Well, Reddit fueled the short squeeze, giving GameStop a huge amount of money to kind of reinvent themselves. They ended with $1 billion, and now today they have $4.8 billion. But this allowed them to kind of get away from being a video game company, strictly speaking, video game. They could kind of reinvent themselves, and the route that they took. Ryan Cohen joins the board in 2021. He eventually becomes a CEO in 2023. He was big on a big strategy shift, which was great for them. They were able to cut costs, refocus the core retail, and collectibles, right? So we're talking Funko Pops, movie merchandise, game merchandise, shirts, cards being a big one. Q4 2024 ends with 131 million net income, 22% growth in SGA. And that was huge for them. This kind of confirmed what they were doing was right. And if you remember, this isn't a down market for cards and collectibles. They're just kind of stagnant. coming in when he did, there wasn't a ton of growth, but this was good for GameStop. Q4 of 2024, collectibles hit 270 million in sales, up 15.8 year over year. 21% of the total revenue comes from collectibles. That's huge, especially coming from a store that is focused on, selling games and stuff. So a big play that they did was in 2024, they also partnered with PSA. How this is big is because you have a powerhouse, trustable name brand like GameStop partying with PSA. Now, a lot of people do know what PSA is, but just think of it outside of terms of a collector. If you don't know, there's a lot of companies that you could go with, right? You got CGC, Beckett, and a lot of other ones popping up now, Tag. But PSA's move was to join with GameStop, which is brilliant because it's a household name. And then also, this gives GameStop an upper leg. It's now a legitimate grading card company. Even though they're not the ones grading it, they're sending it to PSA. But it makes it all in one package of now a collectible powerhouse. So it's a drop-off service in store, no forms, shipping, right? Like you can go drop it off there. And like aside from the things that have happened, right? Cards being stolen, PSA's recent announcement of, cleaning cards. We'll get into another video with that, how that was a mistake. They shouldn't have done that. But essentially the idea is that these two powerhouses are now going to control a lot of that market. And I don't think a lot of people are realizing how big of a move this is, because there isn't truly a, your card shops, they're all probably different, right? You got like the card shop down the street, which is probably different from, the card shop the other direction of your, whatever neighborhood you're in. And you're probably not going to find similar card shops in other cities. Like you're going to find similar card shops, but not with the same name, not the same branding. They're all different. They're differently owned. GameStop is coming in as the card shop. And I don't think people really realize the moves they're making right now to become the biggest card shop, in the world. And I think that's what they're doing. Over 1 million cards graded via GameStop May of 2025. That's just May. Expansion. So they're now growing stores from cutting back stores. Now they've put in another 60 stores with grading. That's huge. They were, there was a lot of degrowth when they were cutting, and now they're back to growing their stores out. They've also pushed to more foot traffic. If you guys know, before all the craze and hype, you were able to pre-order online with GameStop. Now it's, you have to come into stores. For anybody who's new and they're just like camping out the stores like they used to, I think GameStop is getting that. They're rebranding the store and they're showing people, hey, come into our stores. This is what we're doing different. And you have to come in to see it. So it's a total rebrand on imaging. Again, 15.3 million cards graded in 2024. Dominant leaders, CGC, and again, CGC had a lot of mistakes with legitimacy and improving their cards. Beckett declining as well, over 15% year over year. That's huge. I mean, PSA really runs the market, but losing any headway on that is massive. So again, no other grader is going to have that GameStop level recognition where you can be a household name. You can tell your mom or your grandma, hey, have you ever heard of PSA? And there's a good chance they haven't, right? But they have heard of GameStop. And that just alone seals the kind of trust that a lot of these companies do need to continue to grow. And yeah, collectibles have become an asset. This is a totally different era, and I think GameStop's adapting well to it. PSA slabs are now investable assets. It's easy to understand what your items are worth, and convenience in the market visibility with, TCG, eBay, etc. So what does this mean for us, right? I think it means that GameStop is going to have it's going to have a lot more relevance in our future. There's going to be a lot of things that you want to keep track of with what they're doing. I think GameStop and collecting cards is going to have a big growth. And if you even think it's big right now, I think it's going to grow a lot. There's going to be higher margins, customer activity, brand synergy with, card brands. And yeah, they're positioned to have a $10 billion collectible market. This is huge. But yeah, from there, it's kind of crazy that GameStop really did walk into a golden situation where, they were going to fall. People were betting against them. And, nostalgia kind of saved them. Now they went from a, Blockbuster 2.0 to a market disruptor. I think a lot of future game stores, if you're thinking about truly opening up a game store, just keep in mind there's a really, really good chance that you're just going to be competing with, GameStop in the future. I think that's in a lot of people's minds, but I wouldn't be surprised if it really starts coming, and unfolding. So again, GameStop's making big moves with collectibles, joining up with PSA and really refocusing their direction. So yeah, I don't think this is the end of GameStop. I think it's just the beginning. And what you should take from this is that I think card collecting in the future is going to be totally different and a lot more widely accepted. And I think the community is going to grow massively. So anyways, that's just my thoughts for the day. See you in the next one, guys. Peace out.